Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on performance management in Microsoft Teams with Weekly10. I'm Andy Roberts, so I'm founder and CEO at Weekly10. And today we'll be giving you an idea of how you can, respond to the traditional processes that we have around performance management in the workplace and really take them to the next level within an integrated platform inside of Microsoft Teams. So today it'll be a relatively quick session, just half an hour. We'll be taking you through the different, a bit of a reflection really around the traditional ways of managing performance and why we believe it's fractured. We'll talk about the future of performance management and how using slightly different processes in a slightly different way, you can achieve much better outcomes with your performance management in the workplace. And then we'll talk a little bit more specifically about the Weekly10 solution and how that operates within Microsoft Teams to give you a really integrated and effortless experience with the platform itself. We'll keep back 5 minutes or so at the end for questions, but if you do have any questions during the session, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box within the live event console. We'll also give you contact details at the end of the call as to how you can learn more about the platform, or if you'd like to jump on a call with any questions. So let's get started. If we look at the workplace over the past few decades, the one thing that is that stands out more than anything is that how technology has driven the way in which we work, and even more so in the last 12 or 18 months, we've seen a real push towards utilizing technology, whether it's Zoom, whether it's Microsoft Teams, or anything else, to really drive communication and engagement within our teams and within our workplace. The one thing that hasn't changed so much over the past few decades is actually the way in which we manage performance and engagement within the workplace. And typically most organizations are still using performance management processes from decades ago, from the 1980s or 1990s. Maybe we're using them online or we're using a piece of software, but fundamentally the effort required and the conversations that we're having are very similar to what they were a few years ago. So what we're seeing is that technology has moved forward, but actually the HR processes and our performance processes within the workplace haven't moved at the same pace. And if you look at expectations of people within the workplace, and we'll talk about this in a moment, they are vastly different to what we are delivering, and the way in which performance is managed at the moment is what we would call fractured within the workplace itself. So what does the current performance management cycle look like in your organization? It may look like the one here, which is the annual review, or the dreaded annual review as some managers and employees might call it, or it may be quarterly or mid-year reviews throughout the year. But either way, whether it's quarterly, twice a year, or at the end of the year, the one common thing around the way that performance management process works is that it's one big event that occurs, and it doesn't occur on a frequent basis. And what this leads to is to a large amount of focus in a small amount of time around measuring performance and around updating our goals that maybe we should have done or we forgot we had set, filling in forms, and this just adds it really backloads, in this example, the year towards that performance conversation. It means that there's increased stress levels around both employees and managers because they're having to prep for this. It's getting in the way of the business as usual, and more often than not, everybody's just being chased to complete their performance review. And that in itself is an ineffective process. It's not an efficient process. It's a process that takes time, it takes effort, but more importantly, employees and managers, around 80% of employees and managers, say that they actually see very little impact from doing those reviews because they're just centered really around this single point of measurement during the year. And because it's that once a year or every 6 months discussion, we end up falling into some really key areas of performance management, which around the process, which make it very ineffective. So forgetting about the fact that it takes 2 weeks of a manager's time at the end of the year, we also see a lack of effectiveness in the way that performance reviews are being run as well. So if you think about objectives and goals, which are often a common part of performance reviews, we know that they may be set at the beginning of the year, and then they'll be reviewed when it comes to a performance review. And the challenge with that is that often those goals have become outdated. If you think about goals that were set 12 months ago, it's highly likely they'll no longer be relevant to the business and the way in which the business has operated. And if you work in an organization that has agility as a key value, then the processes around performance need to respect that agility and be able to respond to changes in the organization itself. And most organizations are moving in that direction, where agility is a key differentiator between them and their competition. It also means that the conversations around those objectives are typically based around recent events, and recency bias is a term we often use with clients when we talk to them about the fact that these conversations are not balanced. Typically, the conversation about those objectives is focused on recent events, because naturally, as humans, we're able to recall recent events and focus on those in more detail. The second element is subjectivity. Part of this is related to kind of that recency bias, but also the fact that when we don't have an evidence base, an objective evidence base for that performance review, subjectivity naturally comes into it. So based on the current sentiment of the manager and the employee, you're going to get different outcomes around that period of the year. So actually that subjectivity really increases the ineffectiveness of that conversation, and it also makes it more difficult for managers to have conversation when they don't to provide feedback and have that conversation when they don't have an objective evidence base to discuss during the year. Because if the goals have only just been updated and if the form has just been completed, then it doesn't give a balanced view. And then finally, it's very, very process focused. And often we see very complicated kind of processes where there's an employee prep stage, a discussion, calibration stage, and then you're having to bring all of these things together in a very high admin process within the end of year discussion. So what's the alternative to performance management? So some people might say that we should do away with performance management entirely, and we should either let managers come up with their own processes, or we should actually just do away with it entirely and kind of trust our employees to manage their own performance. We believe that there is a real balance between this, that self-reflection and the self-accountability is really important, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But actually, we believe the future of performance management is actually about putting those tools in place continuously throughout the year, and then still providing you with the ability to run these more formal reviews, but doing a much more efficient way. So we see performance management, we talk about the future, but of course this is available today, is all about empowering employees, empowering managers to have those discussions and those conversations and those little snippets of feedback that make sure that people are aligned and that they're moving in the right direction, and providing that constructive feedback throughout the year and providing that real-time ability to do that. If you ask employees to set objectives at the beginning of the year, but they give them no tools to manage those during the year, you can't really expect them to be following those objectives at the end of the year and kind of understand where they're up to with them. So actually providing the ability to regularly track goals, to regularly track KPIs or OKRs within some form of process is really key. And that also focuses on that two-way feedback and making sure that employees are working on the right things at the right time, so that they know how to prioritize, they know to work on certain things over others, and that their focus is very much on where the organization is heading as well. If we're able to provide that timely feedback throughout the year rather than just once per year, then actually we remove the recency bias and we end up having much more focused, much more qualified feedback during the year, which makes those conversations later in the year much easier as well. we build up an objective evidence base. If we can have this process where we have data that's collected throughout the year, and the data is transparent, so that if a manager has provided feedback during the year, the employee knows about it and that they know where everything stands, then again, we get less surprises at the end of the year. And the manager, when they're providing feedback, and the employee, when they're actually providing their assessment of the year, we have a much more transparent view of what's happening, and it's much more objective. And finally, making this process more people focused. The traditional processes are what we would typically call top down. They're driven by HR and senior management to measure performance, and that may be because legally we need to have performance management in place to make sure that if we end up going to tribunal, then we've got some evidence that we can utilize. In many instances it won't be that effective, because it'll only be once per year that we have that information, or it may be because we feel as though driving this process will help focus people and drive performance. But as you'll see, when we talk about solutions such as Weekly10, which is focused more on continuous performance management, you will actually see that it's more people focused. And we say that this is more a tool for employees and managers than it is for HR. Of course, it provides HR with what they need, and it provides them with the data, and it provides them with the process. However, it's focused around the way in which people use the system, and driven by ease of use, and driven by providing people with a tool to manage their own performance, which then also provides us with that overall employee performance management process. So this is the process that we see work with many of our clients. And you can try and implement this manually, and you can implement this using obviously using different forms that you might construct. But as you'll see, using a platform such as Weekly10 allows you to really bring this to a high level of automation and make it a really efficient process. So the Weekly10 process, and the process which gives you this new way of looking at performance management, this continuous approach, is focused around check-ins. So the ability to provide employees with the access to an online check-in, in this case facilitated through Microsoft Teams, as we'll talk about today, and providing that in what we would call an asynchronous way. So it doesn't rely on having a call with a manager. It doesn't require having a meeting booked. It doesn't even require the manager to be working that week, or they may be on holiday or what have you during that period. But always providing employees with a point in time, and we recommend this is weekly, to reflect on where they've achieved, where they've had challenges, and also bubble up any support needs that they have. And if you can do this in a really light touch way, those check-ins are not reports. They are just a point in time to provide that reflective approach. And by reflecting, we know that employees take ownership for their own development. And at the same time, they're providing those conversation openers with the managers. So when something happens, instead of it getting lost in an email thread, or because the manager and the employee haven't had a conversation, that it hasn't been raised, that can be raised as soon as it happens, and then the manager is able to provide that feedback again in an asynchronous way, and also flag items for conversations, for those face-to-face conversations that they will have. And then those check-ins really provide that cadence of reflection and feedback during the year, and they fit nicely with your performance management process, because you can also track and update goals during that period, or objectives, but also you're able to bring in elements of engagement as well. And we won't talk about this in too much detail today, but you are able to ask engagement focused questions as well, to also judge the well-being of the organization and your people as well. And then these frequent check-ins feed into regular face-to-face conversations, whether they be a Microsoft Teams call or whether they be in person in the office. You're able to model a number of different conversations, whether they be bi-weekly or monthly one-to-ones, quarterly goal reviews, or annual performance reviews. You're able to have these more formal conversations, and those conversations are driven from those frequent check-ins. So the topics and the agenda is automatically fed into those conversations. And as you'll see, the great thing with using a platform built into Teams that hooks check-ins to conversations is that actually you can automate the flow of that data into performance reviews, into one-to-ones, such that you end up having zero prep time for those reviews. And actually you have an objective evidence base, an objective agenda to really focus that discussion when you come to those conversations themselves. And Weekly10 is able to provide this through Microsoft Teams today. So we'll go in and show you very quickly how this looks within the Teams environment. Weekly10 is an app which sits within Microsoft Teams. It supports check-in, goal setting, objective setting, and our conversations, so focused around one-to-ones, quarterly reviews, annual reviews, and these are fully customizable. So whether they be the questions that you ask on a regular basis or whether they be the format of the performance review, these are all configurable within the system so that you can build your own process, but based around this approach to continuous performance management. Fantastic. So with that, we will just hop over to Microsoft Teams and show you exactly what this looks like. So this will be a very, very quick demo. If you want a further demo, you can book one in at the end of the call, and we'll give you the details of how to do that. You'll see here that I'm looking at an employee's view within Microsoft Teams. This is Helen. She reports into Andrew, and on a weekly basis, she receives a notification through Teams to check in on Weekly10. She can also check in from her profile here, and you'll see I've already started to fill out some of those questions that that Helen will be filling out on a regular basis. So she's reflecting on her achievements. And again, these questions are customizable for your organization. You can even customize them down to department, team, or even individual level. As you can see, the draft is saved here, but really just reflecting on maybe some of those achievements, maybe if there's been a challenge or two this week and being able to highlight that, if there's any support that's required, answering maybe a quick pulse question. You might rotate these week to week or month to month to provide you with that information. And then finally, you'll see that we also support the ability to recognize others as well. So this is a really great way of sharing thanks. You can even optionally connect this through to a Microsoft Teams channel so that it's shared with everybody in the organization, or you can keep that as private recognition. And you'll see here, I can very quickly type in some thanks. In this case, Hannah, thanks for your help sorting my IT setup this week. And what will happen here is Hannah will receive that notification immediately. She'll also have that added to a profile. So again, when we come to those conversations, we can reflect not just on our own reflections, but also the feedback we received from other people during that period as well. You can also use hashtags within the system as well. So again, a lot of our clients like to use company values as hashtags, and that can help qualify some of that recognition and also feed in some of those key initiatives you have in the organization into those check-ins. If you have any goals set as well, they will appear at the bottom of the check-in, and then that allows the employee to reflect and update those goals as well. Once they're done, they simply click submit, and that goes straight through to the manager, where the manager is able to provide that timely feedback within the platform itself. So if we just go over to the manager's view, we'll actually see that we have the review submitted by Helen. And as a manager, we now have the capability to provide that timely feedback. And again, it's not relying us being on the same call or in the same room or being synchronized in any way. And again, if the manager's on holiday, they come back off holiday, they can quickly have a look at the reflections that their employees have had over that period and then provide that timely feedback and get up to speed with where everybody is up to. Managers have a few different ways of providing that timely feedback. They can do a quick thumbs up, they can do a comment. So for example, great news. Struggling to type this morning. So there you'll see, I'll provide that timely feedback. We could then add that to our next one-to-one agenda. And of course, Helen could respond to that as well in line if she wants. We also have a really popular feature called Pass Up or Pass Across, which is this share icon here, which allows you to highlight something that you'd like to pass up to the next manager. So it allows you as a manager to add this to the bottom of your check-in and share and really expose some of the work from your team and provide that visibility to that employee, both bottom up and also top down to senior management as well. So clicking pass up will add that to the bottom of my check-in, and you can also do what we call a pass across. So if I wanted to send this across to the head of IT, then I simply put the name in here, click on pass across, and that will be sent through to that person as well. If an employee is marked a response as private, of course, you're not able to share it in this way as well. Manager, you have a really good overview of where your team is up to, and you can see this obviously within the screen here. So the check-in process is super simple. It's called Weekly10 for a reason. It should take no more than 10 minutes. Typically takes 5 minutes, and that will vary every week depending on what the employee is reflecting on over that period of time. If we go back to the employee's view, I just want to show you what a conversation looks like within the platform. Weekly10 is able to book in automatically a review meeting. So you can build that into the workflow, into the process. But just to quickly show you, if we had a quarterly review, but this could be an annual review, for example, if we go in as Helen and we see that that quarterly review, you'll see the level of automation that you can achieve using the process. So here, for example, typically, if we had a performance review and it was asking us to reflect on achievements, we'd have to think back over the last period and input our achievements. With Weekly10, you simply click on View Responses, and you're very quickly able to reflect on all of the feedback, all of the things that you've entered into the system over that period, and you just tick these off, and they get added directly to your performance review. So employees can actually prepare for that performance review with zero typing. They can just go through and check off the items that they've recorded in the system over that time period. Goals, reflections in terms of the recognition they may have received, feedback they've had from their manager, they can all construct that as part of the performance review itself. So super simple to use. Everything is driven by notifications through Teams. Check-ins and performance reviews all supported through an integrated platform. We also, as I say, allow you to set goals, OKRs, and also track training as part of the same system. When you do that, of course, they all feed into the check-ins and also into those performance conversations as well. I won't show this today, but we also provide detailed analytics around sentiment analysis and what we call 10 Pulse, which is our engagement score. So by doing those check-ins, we're also able to provide you with a really high level view of how positive or negative your organization is feeling, as well as looking at those engagement levels within the organization. That's on top of course, the other performance management analytics that you'll also get as part of the platform itself. The application through Teams also works directly on mobile. So whilst we do have our own native apps for Android and iOS, you are able to use the Microsoft Teams mobile app to access Weekly10, and that means you can do performance reviews on the mobile, you can do check-ins on the mobile, and you can manage your goals there as well. The extra benefit of using my Weekly10 through Teams is that it's all SSO. So that means no additional accounts, no setup in terms of those users. We also have Active Directory synchronization. So this means that as soon as you connect it to your Active Directory, there's no need to populate Weekly10 with your hierarchy. We will take that directly from the Microsoft Active Directory that you will have because you're using Microsoft Teams set out. In terms of deployment, again, very, very simple. Zero training required for end users. They receive the Teams app, a welcome message, they watch a video, and they're good to go with the platform itself. So we get very high adoption rates because actually using Weekly10 is not adopting another piece of software. It's using Teams, which is a software that people are familiar with and that they're encouraged to use within the workplace. So actually building performance management into Teams is a natural way of rolling out the platform itself. Very quickly, an example of some of the benefits that some of our clients have seen. So this is after 12 months. this is an organisation actually based in New Zealand, 150 employees in the professional services sector. They saw a 95% increase. Well, sorry, a 95% participation rate week to week over a whole year through those check-ins. So every week, 95% of employees were checking in. And often the check-in is seen as more of an optional part of the process. But what it does do is it really powers up those conversations for when employees and managers get together to discuss it. You'll also see over half of employees were recognizing people week to week. They saw significant increases in sentiment and the number of goals aligned to strategy, and 80% reduction in time spent on review preparation was one of the key outcomes they saw as well, by using that continuous process, which gives them a more effective process, but as you can see here, also provided them with a more efficient process at the same time. So just to highlight some of those areas we've covered, we've talked about the kind of the status quo where most of us are at the moment in terms of managing performance. The way we see the future performance management and the continuous approach to performance management that makes things more effective, but also more efficient in the way that you do that. And we've also shown you Weekly 10 in Microsoft Teams itself. So Weekly 10, if you do want to give it a try, we have sandboxes available. So that means you can get a fully populated environment with test data in there, so you can explore how the system would work. We can also provide a free trial of the platform, and you can also book in a one-to-one demo with one of our HR customer success partners who are engagement and performance management specialists, and they're able to give you an overview of how it might work for your organization. I think with that, we have Rebecca with us as well, who has just been manning the Q&A. So if you do have any questions, just pop them into the Q&A.
Perfect. Yes, thanks for that, Andy. So we do have a few questions coming in. The first one is, we're still using annual reviews and there is resistance to innovating from senior leadership. What small steps can I take to start changing our processes?
Yeah, so I think if you're doing the annual reviews, I think it's about small steps, I would say. So if you've got that process in place, obviously it needs to be proven that there is an alternative to those performance reviews. I would say it needs to be small steps. So I would look at trying to bring in some form of process, ideally backed by technology. So maybe something like Weekly 10, where maybe you're not rolling out that whole process. So kind of the check-ins, the quarterlies, the annuals, but actually you're just picking off some of those items. So for example, implementing check-ins, especially within maybe a portion of the organization, would be a very easy way to prove out that continuous approach to feedback particularly is really important. So you've got to think about what a performance review process is. Fundamentally, your annual review is a feedback process. And if you know that that's a broken process because managers are maybe not so good at giving that feedback and the employees are maybe not so great at receiving it, the best way to improve that process is to actually get people normalized to providing feedback and build more of a culture of feedback where when you receive constructive feedback or positive feedback, you're not surprised. And as a manager, you're also not concerned about providing that feedback because it's more normalized. The easiest way to do that is build a habit of feedback. The best way to do that is to do some form of check-in, such as Weekly 10, over a period of time that builds that culture around opening up feedback. That, especially if you choose it with maybe a pilot group within your organization, would clearly prove out that actually that form of feedback is more effective than the once a year hit that you get with your annual reviews. The key thing here as well is, you're right, people are concerned about moving away from the annual approach. If you're using something like Weekly 10, again, you get that continuous feedback, but you don't necessarily lose your annual review. It just means your annual review is much more quick and effective to do within that process. But certainly, if you want some more information on that, we're more than happy. Our HR customer success teams have obviously seen that issue a few times and are able to kind of provide advice as well.
Thanks for that, Andy. So we do have a few more questions coming through, but I'm conscious of the time. If we can just do one more, what do you mean by recency bias?
Sure. So recency bias is is really where, as humans, and our people scientists will happily talk about this all day, we focus on recent events more than we do events prior to that. So a good example of that is you do your annual review. The performance of that employee will in the last month, for example, will heavily weight the performance review that you provide. It will not account as much for something that happened 11 months ago as what happened 1 month ago, because naturally our attitudes and our current thoughts are based on more recent events, and unless we have something that tells us what happened 11 months ago, it may be that doesn't even come up in conversation. So the employee maybe won an account 11 months ago and that was a great win. We come to the performance review at the end of the year, we might be focusing on a customer loss in the last month, but we don't have a balanced view and reflect on what happened 11 months ago, because actually it's kind of been lost in the noise over that period. But actually, if we have that objective evidence base and actually we look back and we say, well, this happened 11 months ago, let's talk about why that happened and why that was different to what happened this month. And that gives us a much more balanced view of development. It's far too easy sometimes to focus on what's happened recently with an employee than balancing things across the year. And that recency bias does not just affect managers, it affects employees as well. So having that ability to reflect over the last year and reflect on what we've done and where we've achieved in itself is a big form of professional development, because when we reflect, we often change our behaviors moving forward.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Andy. So as I say, we do have a few more questions. The next one is Weekly10 free as part of our Office 365 package?
Short answer is, if your organization is more than 5 employees, then there is a cost to Weekly10. So it's a third-party application which has been tested and verified by Microsoft. Any addition that you add to 365 or you add to Teams, whether it's Microsoft or a third party, is typically an increase in your subscription. However, Weekly10 has a number of different options in terms of that. So we have our Connect package and we have our Momentum package, and both of those offer different levels of capability. So if you just want check-ins, then that's obviously at a much lower cost than if you're looking at performance reviews. The key thing with Weekly10, however, though, is there's no integration, implementation or onboarding fees. Everything is based around a cost per user, and that can either be done monthly or it can be done on an annual basis, and that ties in nicely with your 365 subscription.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Okay, so I think it's probably just time to wrap up now. So I just want to say thank you, Andy, for sharing your knowledge there around performance management in Microsoft Teams. And as I say, there is going to be a recording of this, so we'll send this out to those of you that have attended today. And again, thank you ever so much for your time.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.